Mom. I don't think you'd enjoy this trip. Ryan said it gently. So gently that someone standing in another room might have mistaken it for kindness. But at 63, Margaret Ellis had lived long enough to understand what those words really meant. You don't belong with us anymore. She smiled anyway. Mothers become experts at smiling through small heartbreaks. Of course, sweetheart, she said. I understand. And perhaps she did. Napa Valley. Wine tastings. Formal dinners. Her son's 10th wedding anniversary. Claire's parents were going. Claire's sister was going. Even the grandchildren were going. Everyone. Except her. Ryan looked relieved. Thanks, Mom. We just thought you might feel out of place. Out of place. The words settled quietly between them. Margaret nodded. Don't worry about me. Claire smiled warmly. We'll bring you something back. Margaret smiled again. Because what else was there to do? She walked them to the door. Hugged her son. Told them to have a wonderful trip. Then she watched their car disappear down the street. Only after the taillights were gone did she close the front door. The house had never sounded so quiet. She stayed there for a moment. Hands still on the doorknob. Then she walked upstairs. At the bottom of her closet sat an old cedar chest. Inside were photographs. Birthday cards. School drawings. And a small blue velvet box. She lifted it carefully. It was empty. Completely empty. Her thumb brushed the faded lining. Then she whispered words she had not spoken in decades. I hope it was worth it, Daddy. Downstairs, her phone buzzed. A new message. A photograph from Claire. The family standing together, smiling as they planned the trip. Margaret didn't open it. She closed the velvet box instead. Her name was Margaret Ellis. She was 63 years old. She had spent most of her life working at Miller's grocery store in Dayton, Ohio. 31 years. Long enough to know where every item belonged. Long enough to remember customers' birthdays. Long enough for children she once gave stickers to become parents themselves. She had retired 6 months earlier. People said retirement would be wonderful. Peaceful. Relaxing. Nobody mentioned how quiet it could be. Or how much of your identity disappears when you stop going somewhere every morning. For 38 years, though, she had another job. Being Ryan's mother. That one never retired. She walked back downstairs and made herself a cup of tea. The anniversary gift sat on the kitchen counter. Already wrapped. A hand-painted serving platter with little blue flowers around the edge. Claire once mentioned she liked blue. Margaret remembered things like that. She remembered everyone's favorite pie. Everyone's birthdays. Who hated mushrooms? Who liked extra gravy at Thanksgiving? She had always believed love lived in small details. She sat at the kitchen table. Looked at the gift. Then at the empty chair across from her. A memory came unexpectedly. Ryan at age 8. Missing his front teeth. Sitting in that same chair, proudly showing her a spelling test. 98%. He had been devastated about the missing 2 points. She had taken him out for ice cream anyway. She smiled. Then sighed. Funny how motherhood works. You spend years wishing your children would grow up. Then one day, they do. And the house becomes too large. Her phone rang. Ruth Bennett. Margaret smiled and answered. Hello, troublemaker. You sound sad. I do not. You do. Margaret laughed softly. Some friendships lasted because people were polite. Others lasted because they knew you too well. Ruth knew her too well. What happened? Her friend asked. Margaret hesitated. Then said quietly. Ryan and Claire are going to Napa. That's nice. It is. Silence. And? Margaret looked at the anniversary gift. I'm not going. Another silence. A longer one. Finally, Ruth spoke. He left you out? Margaret stared at the steam rising from her tea. It wasn't like that. Then tell me how it was. She almost repeated Ryan's words. You wouldn't enjoy it. You'd feel out of place. But somehow, saying them out loud felt worse. Instead she said. They thought it wasn't really my kind of trip. The line went silent. Then Ruth sighed. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Ruth. Nope. Click. Margaret laughed despite herself. She carried her tea to the living room. The evening sun spilled through the windows. The old clock on the mantel ticked softly. Tick. 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 She had always liked that sound. It reminded her that even ordinary days were moving forward. She looked around the room. The framed photographs. Ryan's kindergarten picture. His college graduation. His wedding. A whole life hanging on her walls. She loved her son. Nothing would ever change that. But for the first time in a very long while, a strange thought entered her mind. If she disappeared tomorrow, what would be left of Margaret Ellis? Not Ryan's mother. Not the retired grocery clerk. Just Margaret. The woman she used to be. The woman her father knew. The woman who once had dreams of her own. She looked toward the stairs. Toward the cedar chest upstairs. Toward the empty blue velvet box. A box that held a secret her son had never known. A secret she never intended to tell him. Because mothers don't keep score. They simply love. Even when it costs them something precious. Outside, a car pulled into the driveway. Ruth was early. As usual. Margaret stood and wiped her eyes. Then she smiled. Because after a lifetime of small heartbreaks, she had become very good at that too. Ruth arrived 12 minutes later. She always said 20. She never meant it. Margaret opened the door before she could knock. Ruth took one look at her friend's face and held up a paper bag. I brought cinnamon rolls. You think pastries solve everything? They solve more than most people. That earned a smile. Good. 1 point for the pastries. They sat at the kitchen table. The anniversary gift was still there. Wrapped. Untouched. Ruth noticed it immediately. You already bought them something. Margaret nodded. Last week. Ruth sighed. The sigh of someone who already knew the answer but asked anyway. He really didn't invite you? Margaret stirred her tea. No. And Claire? No. Another sigh. Then Ruth looked around the kitchen. She had sat at this table hundreds of times. She remembered Ryan doing homework here. She remembered birthday cakes. Christmas cookies. Science projects. A little boy running through the house. Now there was only one mug. One plate in the sink. One chair that looked used. The others looked like furniture. Margaret, she said softly, when was the last time Ryan came over just to see you? Margaret thought about it. I don't know. When was the last time he invited you somewhere? I don't know. When was the last time he asked what you wanted? Margaret smiled. You're in a mood today. I'm serious. I know. Silence. Ruth folded her arms. You spent your whole life putting him first. I wanted to. I know. He was my son. I know. Ruth's voice softened. But who put you first? Margaret opened her mouth. Then closed it. She didn't have an answer. The refrigerator hummed softly. Outside, a lawn mower started somewhere down the street. Inside the kitchen, neither woman moved. Finally, Margaret laughed. That's an awfully deep question for a Wednesday. Ruth didn't laugh. Because she wasn't joking. Margaret looked at the wrapped gift again. I really am happy for them. I know you are. I mean it. I know. She smiled. They're good parents. Yes. They've built a nice life. Yes. A pause. I guess I just thought. Her voice trailed off. Ruth waited. Margaret looked at the empty chair across from her. I thought there would always be room for me. There it was. Not Napa Valley. Not the wine. Not the trip. A seat. A place. A chair at the table. Ruth reached across and squeezed her hand. I've been thinking lately, Margaret said. That's dangerous. Margaret laughed. Maybe retirement is changing me. How? She looked around the little house. I don't know who I am anymore. Ruth frowned. You're Margaret. Besides that. You make the best meatloaf in Ohio. Besides that. You always overwater your plants. Margaret smiled. Ruth. Her friend leaned back. Then her face softened. Oh. Margaret nodded. Oh. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Margaret said quietly. For 38 years, I was somebody's mother. She looked toward the hallway where Ryan's childhood photos still hung. Before that, I was somebody's daughter. She smiled. And for 31 years, I worked at the grocery store. She looked down at her hands. I don't know who Margaret is when all those things get quiet. Ruth's eyes filled. Not with tears. With understanding. Because retirement does that to people. Children moving away does that too. One day, life asks. Who are you now? And sometimes the answer doesn't come right away. Ruth looked toward the stairs. Toward the cedar chest. You took out the velvet box, didn't you? Margaret nodded. Yes. What made you think of it? She considered the question. Then smiled sadly. I don't know. But perhaps she did. Some hurts have a way of leading us back to old sacrifices. Back to the people we once were. Back to the things we gave up. Ruth stood. Without asking, she walked upstairs. A moment later she returned carrying the little blue box. She set it gently on the table. Neither woman touched it. You never threw this away. No. You could have. I know. Why didn't you? Margaret thought for a long time. Then she smiled. Maybe because empty things matter too. Ruth looked at her. The watch is gone. Yes. But what it bought? She looked toward the family photographs. Is still here. The kitchen became very still. Ruth looked from the empty box, to the wedding photo on the wall. To her friend. And suddenly, she wasn't seeing a retired grocery clerk. She was seeing a 32-year-old mother. Scared. Alone. Holding the last thing her father ever gave her. Then letting it go. For her son. Ruth's throat tightened. Did you ever miss it? Margaret smiled. Sometimes. And regret it? The answer came immediately. Never. Not even a second. Not even once. She closed the box gently. I got to bring my little boy home. She smiled. I think I made the right trade. Something inside Ruth broke a little. Because there was no bitterness in her friend's voice. No resentment. Only love. 31 years later. Still only love. She looked at the wedding gift on the counter. Then at the empty box. Then back at Margaret. And in that moment, she made a decision. A decision that would change everything. She reached for her purse. Can I borrow your phone charger? Margaret frowned. You hate using my chargers. I know. You say mine are too slow. I've changed. Margaret laughed. You're terrible. Maybe. But she wasn't thinking about chargers. She was thinking about a man in Napa Valley. A man who had no idea what his mother had once given up for him. And for the first time in 38 years. Ruth Bennett decided she was going to interfere. The next afternoon, Napa Valley looked exactly the way postcards promised it would. Sunlight spilled over the vineyards. A fountain sparkled in the middle of the resort courtyard. Someone was playing soft piano music in the lobby. Ryan stood on the balcony outside his room, adjusting his tie. Inside, Claire was getting ready for dinner. Tonight was the big anniversary dinner. 10 years. A whole decade. He should have been happy. Instead, he couldn't stop thinking about his mother. Not because of the trip. Because of her smile. The one she gave him before he left. The kind that looked real until you remembered it later. Then your heart sank. His phone buzzed. Ruth Bennett. He smiled. That was unusual. He answered immediately. Hey, Ruth. No greeting came back. Ryan. Something in her voice made him straighten. Everything okay? Is your mother okay? The question caught him off guard. Of course. A pause. Then why is she sitting alone in her kitchen tonight? He frowned. What? Why is she sitting at home while everyone else is there with you? The fountain below seemed to grow louder. It's not like that. Then tell me what it's like. Ryan rubbed his forehead. He'd had this conversation with himself all week. It's a fancy trip. So? I didn't think she'd enjoy it. Did you ask her? Silence. A couple walked past the balcony laughing. Ryan watched them go. No. Ruth sighed. Did she tell you she'd rather stay home? No. Then who decided for her? He didn't answer. Because suddenly. He didn't know. Was it him? Claire? Both of them? Or had they simply assumed? He looked out at the vineyards. Beautiful. Perfect. And all at once, they seemed strangely unimportant. Ruth spoke again. I have a question. Okay. When was the last time your mother did something just for herself? Ryan frowned. I don't know. When was the last time she chose herself over someone else? No answer. Because he couldn't think of one. Not a single time. The line stayed quiet. Then Ruth asked softly. Do you remember being 7? He blinked. What? You had pneumonia. A memory surfaced. A hospital room. A stuffed bear. Orange popsicles. His mother sleeping in a chair. I remember some of it. Do you remember asking your mother if you were going home? He swallowed. A little more came back. A hand stroking his hair. A woman saying. Soon, sweetheart. Soon, asterisk asterisk. I think so. Do you know why you got to go home? He frowned. What do you mean? Silence. Then. Because your mother sold the last thing her father ever gave her. Ryan stopped breathing. What? The word came out as a whisper. Your grandfather's watch. He leaned against the balcony railing. What? She sold it to pay your hospital bills. No. That couldn't be right. His mother never mentioned a watch. Never mentioned money. Never mentioned sacrifice. Nothing. The world suddenly felt tilted. Ruth. She had $34 in her purse. His chest tightened. She didn't have enough. The fountain below continued to run. Somewhere, people laughed. Inside the room, Claire was humming softly. And Ryan couldn't move. She walked into a pawn shop with the last gift her father ever gave her. A pause. And she walked out with enough money to bring her little boy home. The words landed one by one. Heavy. Permanent. His hand tightened around the phone. I didn't know. I know. He covered his mouth. I didn't know. I know. The second time hurt worse. Because it was true. He didn't know. He didn't know because he'd never asked. Never wondered. Never looked. Tears stung his eyes. What kind of watch? A silver pocket watch. Silence. She kept the empty box. He looked up. The blue velvet box? Ruth went quiet. You remember it. A memory flashed. Him at 9 years old. Opening a little blue box. Asking. Mom, what goes in here? Her answer. Something important once did. Then she'd smiled and changed the subject. Oh God. Oh God. His legs suddenly felt weak. He sat down. The resort around him disappeared. There was only one image left. A young woman. 32 years old. Alone. Standing in a pawn shop. Holding something precious. And letting it go. For him. Tears slipped down his face. You still there? Ruth asked gently. Yeah. But his voice didn't sound like his anymore. A long silence passed. Then Ruth spoke softly. Ryan. Yeah? Your mother didn't tell me this story. He frowned. What? I remembered it. He looked up. She wasn't sitting here talking about sacrifice. The words hit him. Hard. She wasn't keeping score. He closed his eyes. She never does. No. Ruth's voice softened. That's the problem. More silence. Then she said something he would remember for the rest of his life. She gave up something precious for you. A pause. And yesterday, she acted as if being left behind wasn't a big deal. The tears came harder now. Because suddenly he understood. The trip had never been the problem. The problem was this. A woman who had made him the center of her world. Had slowly become an afterthought in his. The balcony door slid open. Claire stepped outside. She stopped when she saw his face. Ryan? He couldn't answer. Ruth spoke one last time. Your mother isn't angry. That somehow made it worse. She still loves you exactly the same. A long pause. But if I were you. Ryan looked toward the sunset. I'd ask myself whether she deserved better. The line went dead. He sat there. Phone in hand. Watching the sun sink behind the vineyards. And for the first time in his life. Ryan Ellis wondered if success had cost him something far more valuable than money. He wondered if, somewhere along the way, he had forgotten to see his mother. Ryan? Claire stepped onto the balcony. The sunset painted the vineyards gold. She smiled at first. Then she saw his face. What's wrong? He looked up. There were tears in his eyes. She had seen him stressed. Angry. Exhausted. She had never seen him like this. Ryan? He swallowed. My mother sold her father's watch. She frowned. What? To pay my hospital bills. Silence. The piano music from the lobby drifted through the evening air. Claire didn't move. He repeated it. Slower this time. When I was 7. The color slowly left her face. Oh my God. Neither of them spoke. A waiter passed below carrying a tray of champagne. Someone laughed near the fountain. The whole resort suddenly felt very far away. Claire sat beside him. Who told you? Ruth. And your mom never said anything? He shook his head. Not once. She looked toward the vineyards. I didn't know. I know. Another silence. Then she whispered. And we left her at home. The words hung there. Painful because they were true. Ryan lowered his head. I made my own mother feel like she didn't belong. Claire reached for his hand. I did too. He looked at her. No. Yes. Her eyes were shining now. I thought she'd be uncomfortable here. She laughed softly. What a terrible thing to decide for someone else. Neither of them spoke. A breeze moved through the grapevines. Finally, Ryan said. She sold the last thing her father ever gave her. His voice broke. And I couldn't even save her a seat at our table. Claire closed her eyes. Because there was no answer to that. A few moments later, the balcony door opened again. Claire's mother leaned out. There you are. She smiled. They're serving dinner. No one answered. Her smile faded. Everything all right? Ryan stood. We're leaving. She blinked. What? We're going home. Silence. But the anniversary dinner. I know. She looked at Claire. Then back at Ryan. Did something happen? Ryan nodded once. My mother happened. The older woman frowned. He didn't explain. Because he couldn't. Not yet. Some realizations are too large for immediate words. 20 minutes later, they were in the car. The resort disappeared behind them. The vineyards gave way to the highway. Neither of them turned on the radio. Finally, Claire spoke. Can I ask you something? He nodded. If your mother had told you this story years ago, would you have believed it? He thought about it. Then shook his head. No. Why? He looked out the window. Because I thought I knew everything about her. Silence. I didn't. He laughed once. A sad little laugh. I know what coffee she drinks. What pie she likes. What TV shows she watches. Another pause. But I don't know what she gave up. The highway stretched ahead of them. Dark. Endless. He stared through the windshield. I don't know what she was afraid of. What she dreamed about. What she lost. His voice grew quiet. I don't know who she was before she became my mother. Claire turned toward him. There it was. The real wound. Not guilt. Grief. The grief of realizing there are entire chapters of our parents' lives that we never bothered to read. She reached for his hand. I think you still have time. He looked at her. For what? To know her. Neither of them spoke for a while. Then she asked softly. What are you going to do? He looked at the road. The answer came immediately. I'm going to find that watch. She blinked. After 31 years? Yes. What if it's gone? He gripped the steering wheel. Then I'll know I tried. A long silence. What if you find it? He thought about that. Then smiled sadly. I don't think I'm looking for a watch anymore. She frowned. Then what are you looking for? He looked out at the darkness. At the reflection of his own face in the window. At the man who had somehow forgotten to see his mother. Finally, he answered. A way back. They drove through the night. Around midnight, they stopped for coffee. The gas station was almost empty. As the cashier handed him his change, Ryan suddenly remembered something. He was 10 years old. Standing in a grocery store. Asking for candy. His mother looking into her purse. Counting coins. Then smiling anyway. He had forgotten that memory. Now it came rushing back. How many times had she quietly gone without? How many things had she put back on shelves? How many times had she said, "I'm not hungry, sweetheart," because there wasn't enough? He stood there holding a paper cup of coffee, unable to move. Claire touched his arm. "Ryan?" He looked up. "I think my mother was poor for a very long time." She smiled sadly. "I think she was." He nodded. Then whispered something almost to himself. "I never noticed." And somehow, that hurt more than anything else. They reached Ohio just before dawn. The sky was still dark when Ryan pulled into his driveway. He should have been exhausted. Instead, he felt wide awake. As if the last 24 hours had rearranged something inside him. Claire touched his hand. "Get some sleep." He shook his head. "I can't." "I know." She looked at him carefully. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" He almost smiled. "No." She nodded. Then, to his surprise, she said, "Good." He looked at her. "You think I'm being ridiculous?" "No." A small smile appeared. "I think you're finally paying attention." An hour later, Ryan stood in his garage holding a cup of coffee. On a shelf sat a cardboard box labeled "Mom's Things." He had moved it here after helping her clean out the attic 2 summers ago. He opened it. Old birthday cards. School drawings. A broken toy truck. A faded photo album. At the bottom sat a picture frame. He pulled it out. It was a photograph of him and his mother. He couldn't have been more than 7. They were standing in front of a hospital. His arm was around her waist. She looked exhausted. Her hair was a mess. But she was smiling. He turned the frame over. On the back, in his mother's handwriting, were 4 words. "The day we came home." He sat down. For a long time, he simply looked at the picture. The day we came home. Not the day I paid the bill. Not the day I lost Dad's watch. Not the hardest week of my life. Just the day we came home. As if the only thing that mattered was that her little boy had made it home. He closed his eyes. Then reached for his phone. At 9 o'clock that morning, he was standing in front of Miller's Bakery. Except 31 years ago. It had been Miller's Pawn and Loan. The building looked smaller than he imagined. The sign was different. The windows were different. But the bricks were the same. He stood there for a long moment. Trying to picture his mother. 32 years old. Alone. Holding a silver watch. The front door opened. An elderly man stepped outside carrying a tray of bread. "Can I help you?" Ryan cleared his throat. "This used to be a pawn shop." The man smiled. "A long time ago. My mother sold something here." The man's smile faded. "People sold many things here." Ryan nodded. "I know." He opened the blue velvet box. It was this. The old man looked inside. Then his eyes widened slightly. "Well now." Ryan's heart skipped. "You recognize it?" "No." The old man looked at the empty indentation in the fabric. "But I recognize that box." Silence. "You do?" The old man nodded slowly. "I remember a woman carrying it." Ryan stopped breathing. "What?" The man looked at him carefully. Dark hair. Blue coat. Crying, but trying not to. The world seemed to tilt. "My mother." The old man nodded. "I remember her." Ryan swallowed hard. "How?" The old man gave a small laugh. "Because she came back in." "What?" "About 5 minutes after she sold the watch." Ryan stared at him. She changed her mind? No. The old man smiled sadly. She wanted one last look. Silence. She asked if she could hold it again. The air left Ryan's lungs. The old man continued. I handed it to her. A pause. She kissed the watch. Another pause. Then she gave it back. Ryan couldn't speak. The old man looked away, remembering. I've owned that building for 50 years. I've seen people sell jewelry, wedding rings, family heirlooms. But I never forgot that woman. He looked back at Ryan. Because when I asked if she was sure. His voice softened. She said she wasn't losing anything. A long silence. She said she was getting her little boy back. Ryan lowered his head. A tear landed on the velvet box. Then another. The old man pretended not to notice. Some moments deserve dignity. After a while, Ryan looked up. Do you know what happened to the watch? The old man thought for a moment. Then smiled. Maybe. Hope flickered. It was a special piece. Silver. Hand engraving. We didn't get many watches like that. He disappeared inside the bakery. A minute later, he returned carrying an old ledger. He turned several pages. Then stopped. There. Ryan stepped closer. The old man ran his finger down the page. It was sold to a collector. Do you know his name? The old man adjusted his glasses. Then smiled. I think I do. Ryan's heart started pounding. The old man tore a piece of paper from a notepad. Wrote down a name. An address. And handed it over. Ryan looked at it. Then back at him. Thank you. The old man shook his head. No. He looked at the blue velvet box. Thank your mother. Silence. Then he smiled. She raised a man who came looking. Ryan looked down at the paper in his hand. For the first time since the phone call. He felt something besides guilt. Hope. A small one. Fragile. But real. He closed the velvet box. Tucked the address into his pocket. And walked back to his car. Because somewhere out there. A silver watch was still ticking. The address led Ryan to a small town outside Louisville. It wasn't what he expected. He had imagined a large estate. A mansion. Something grand. Instead, he found a white farmhouse with a wraparound porch and flower beds filled with yellow daisies. An old pickup truck sat in the driveway. Wind chimes swayed gently in the afternoon breeze. For some reason, that made him nervous. He checked the address again. This was it. He picked up the blue velvet box and walked to the front door. Before he could knock, it opened. A woman in her 60s smiled at him. You must be Ryan. He blinked. How did you know? She laughed softly. Mr. Miller called me. Of course he had. Small-town people always seem to know everything. I'm Eleanor Green. She held out her hand. I'm afraid you've come a long way. Ryan's stomach tightened. Oh. She stepped aside. Come in. The living room was warm and simple. Bookshelves. Family photographs. A grandfather clock ticking quietly in the corner. Nothing about it looked like the home of a serious collector. Then he noticed a glass cabinet. Inside were dozens of pocket watches. Silver. Gold. Brass. Some looked 100 years old. Some even older. Eleanor followed his gaze. My father loved clocks. She smiled. He said watches are little containers for memories. Ryan looked down at the velvet box in his hands. That felt true. They sat at the kitchen table. She poured him coffee. Then she looked at him kindly. Tell me about your mother. The question surprised him. He had expected to talk about the watch. Not his mother. He thought for a moment. Then smiled. She remembers everyone's birthdays. Eleanor smiled. What else? She makes the best chicken soup in the world. What else? He laughed softly. She never buys anything full price. The older woman laughed. Eleanor laughed. I like your mother already. Ryan smiled. So do I. Then his smile faded. I just wish I'd said that more often. The older woman nodded. There was no judgment in her face. Just understanding. She folded her hands on the table. And what did your mother do? She worked in a grocery store. For how long? 31 years. Eleanor smiled softly. That's a good, steady life. Ryan looked at the blue velvet box. It doesn't sound very impressive. No? She tilted her head. Tell me, when you were a child, did you ever wonder where dinner came from? He frowned. No. Did you worry whether the lights would stay on? No. Did you wonder if someone would pick you up when you were sick? No. She smiled again. Then your mother had a very impressive life. The room fell quiet. The grandfather clock ticked softly. Ryan looked down. He had never thought of it that way. Not once. Finally, Eleanor stood. I think there's something you should see. She walked to the glass cabinet. Unlocked it. Then reached to the top shelf. She carried over a small wooden box. Ryan's breath caught. The box looked old. The kind of thing that had been opened carefully for many years. She placed it on the table between them. For a moment, neither touched it. Then she opened it. Inside lay a silver pocket watch. Ryan forgot to breathe. There it was. The engraved edges. The worn chain. The tiny scratch near the hinge. His grandfather's watch. His mother's watch. He reached toward it. Then stopped. Afraid somehow that touching it might make it disappear. Eleanor noticed. You can hold it. Very carefully, he picked it up. It felt heavier than he expected. As though it had been carrying 31 years all by itself. He turned it over. Opened it. And there, inside the lid, were the words. To my Margaret. Time may take many things. But never forget your worth. Love, Dad. His vision blurred. He blinked. Then again. A tear landed on the silver. He quickly wiped it away. I'm sorry. Don't be. He laughed softly. I've done a lot of crying lately. Eleanor smiled. Sometimes that's how we catch up with ourselves. That made him laugh again. A little. Did your father buy this? He asked. She nodded. At an estate sale, years ago. He carried it? Every day. Ryan looked up. Really? She smiled. My father lost his own father when he was 12. Her hand rested gently on the wooden box. He believed every object carried a story. He used to wonder about the woman named Margaret. Ryan looked at her. He did. Oh yes. She smiled. Sometimes he'd open the watch and read the engraving. Another smile. He always hoped she had a good life. The room suddenly felt smaller. As if two families had somehow been connected all these years without knowing it. He'd be happy to know she did, Ryan said quietly. Eleanor nodded. I think he would. They sat in silence for a while. Not an uncomfortable silence. Just the kind that follows something important. Finally, Ryan closed the watch. I'd like to buy it. Eleanor looked at him. Would you? Yes. I'll pay whatever it's worth. She smiled. And what is it worth? He frowned. I don't know. No one ever does. She looked toward the window. My father used to say that antiques are funny things. How so? The price and the value are almost never the same. Ryan looked at the watch again. She was right. How do you put a price on a grandfather's gift? A mother's sacrifice? A son's regret? You can't. He looked back at Eleanor. I still want to buy it. She smiled. Tell me something first. Okay. If I give you this watch, what will happen to it? He thought for a moment. Then answered honestly. My mother will probably put it back in its blue velvet box. Eleanor smiled. What else? She'll hold it. Another pause. Maybe cry a little. A small laugh. What else? He looked out the window. Then smiled. I think she'll talk to her father. The older woman's eyes filled. What else? Ryan's voice softened. I think she'll remember that she mattered to someone long before she became my mother. Silence. The grandfather clock ticked twice. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled. I think you're finally getting to know her. He smiled back. Maybe he was. She gently pushed the wooden box across the table. It's yours. He blinked. What? The watch. No. I couldn't. Yes, you can. I insist on paying. She shook her head. My father wouldn't want that. Silence. He believes some things need to go home. She smiled. And this watch has been away long enough. Ryan stared at her. You don't even know us. She laughed softly. I know enough. She looked at the engraving. A father loved his daughter. She looked back at Ryan. A mother loved her son. A small smile. And now that son is trying to find his way back. She pushed the box toward him once more. I think that's payment enough. For a moment, he couldn't speak. Then he whispered. Thank you. Eleanor reached across the table and touched his hand. No, Ryan. She smiled. When you see your mother, thank her for reminding us that some people give up everything and never ask to be repaid. He nodded. Then carefully placed the watch back into the blue velvet box. For the first time in 31 years. It fit perfectly. And somehow. So did everything else. The sun was setting when Ryan pulled into his mother's driveway. He smiled. Then frowned. There were boxes on the porch. A lamp leaned against the front door. 2 empty bookshelves sat in the garage. His heart skipped. He stepped out of the car. The blue velvet box suddenly felt heavier. The front door was open. Inside, Margaret was wrapping dishes in newspaper. She looked up and smiled. You're back. He stared at the room. Half the pictures were gone. The walls looked strange without them. Mom, what's happening? She folded another sheet of newspaper. I'm moving. The words landed softly. But they hit him like a punch. What? She looked up. To Indian Lake. Silence. You're moving? Yes. When? In 3 days. 3 days. He had driven to another state. Found the watch. Brought it home. And all the while, his mother had been packing up her life. He looked around again. The old house suddenly felt temporary. As if he had arrived at the end of something. Why didn't you tell me? Margaret smiled gently. I was going to. When? When you got back. The answer made no sense. He laughed once. A short, confused laugh. You were just going to call me and say, by the way, I'm leaving? I'm not leaving the country, sweetheart. She smiled. It's 20 minutes away. But he barely heard her. He was still staring at the boxes. At the empty spots on the walls. At the spaces where memories used to hang. Then he understood something. This wasn't about distance. It was about change. The house where every birthday happened. Every Christmas. Every scraped knee. Every report card. It was ending. And somehow, he had missed the beginning of that ending. Just like he'd missed so many other things. Why now? He asked quietly. Margaret stopped wrapping dishes. She thought for a moment. Then smiled. I think I'd like a little adventure. He almost laughed. At 63. A little adventure. It sounded exactly like something she would say. But her eyes told another story. There was peace there. A kind of peace he hadn't seen before. And suddenly, he realized something else. This move wasn't because of him. It wasn't punishment. It wasn't anger. It was something much harder to accept. She had built a life beyond being his mother. And he wasn't ready for that. Mom. She looked up. He held up the blue velvet box. Her eyes immediately found it. Neither of them spoke. Very slowly, he walked toward her. What is that? She whispered. He didn't answer. He placed the box on the kitchen table. The same table where he'd done homework. The same table where she'd paid bills. The same table where she'd sat alone 2 nights ago. He opened the lid. Inside lay the silver watch. Margaret didn't move. For a moment, she looked almost frightened. Then she stepped closer. One hand rose to her mouth. No. Her voice was barely audible. Ryan swallowed. I found it. She looked at him. Then at the watch. Then back at him. No. A small shake of her head. That's not possible. He smiled through tears. I thought so too. She reached out. Stopped. Then reached again. Her fingers trembled as they touched the silver. She picked it up. And for a long time. She simply held it. The kitchen seemed to grow very still. Then she opened the cover. Saw the engraving. And closed her eyes. A tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. Neither did he. Because some tears deserve to stay for a while. Finally, she whispered. Oh, Daddy. The words sounded like they had traveled 31 years to reach this room. Ryan felt his own eyes fill. She touched the engraving with one finger. Then smiled. The kind of smile that carries grief and gratitude at the same time. I thought I'd never see this again. He couldn't speak. She looked at him. How did you do this? He laughed softly. I drove to Kentucky. She blinked. Kentucky? Apparently, the watch has had a very interesting life. A tiny laugh escaped her. Then another. Then she looked at him with such tenderness that his chest hurt. You drove all the way to Kentucky, for me? He nodded. She looked down at the watch again. Then at her son. And something changed in her expression. As if she were seeing not the successful man standing in her kitchen, but the little boy she'd once carried out of a hospital. Very gently, she touched his face. You didn't have to do this. I know. Then why? He looked at the watch. At the engraving. At the woman in front of him. Then he answered honestly. Because I forgot your story. Silence. I knew you as my mother. His voice shook. But I forgot you were a daughter first. Another silence. I forgot someone loved you before I existed. Margaret's eyes filled again. I forgot you had things that mattered to you. A breath. And I forgot that you've given up things I never even knew about. The kitchen was so quiet that he could hear the old wall clock ticking. Tick. 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 I don't want to forget anymore. Margaret looked at him for a very long time. Then she set the watch down and pulled him into her arms, just as she had when he was a little boy. Ryan closed his eyes. For the first time in days, he felt like he could breathe. And standing in the half-packed kitchen of a house that was about to become a memory, mother and son held each other, while beside them, the old silver watch kept ticking. They stood there for a long time. Neither of them said anything. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and cardboard boxes. The evening sun stretched across the floor. Finally, Margaret stepped back. She looked at her son. Then at the watch. Then back at her son. "You've been crying." Ryan laughed softly. "A little. A little? I may have cried in 2 states." That earned a smile. Good. The kind of smile that comes after a storm. Margaret put the watch back into the blue velvet box. Very carefully. As though she were putting an old friend to bed. Then she sat at the kitchen table. Ryan sat across from her. For a moment, neither knew where to begin. Then Margaret asked, "Did you eat today?" He laughed. There it was. No matter what happened, she was still his mother. "Yes." "What did you eat?" "Mom." "What did you eat?" He smiled. "A sandwich." She nodded, satisfied. Then they both laughed. The tension in the room softened. Ryan looked around. At the boxes. At the half-empty shelves. At the framed pictures waiting to be wrapped. "You really are excited about this move?" She nodded. "I am." He looked surprised. "I thought you'd be sad." "Oh, I'll miss this house." She looked toward the living room. "I brought you home here. You learned to ride your bike here. You had chicken pox here." A smile. "And you broke that lamp when you were 12. He laughed. "I blamed the dog." "You did." She smiled. "We didn't even have a dog." He laughed harder. Then the laughter faded. "Why didn't I notice?" She frowned. "What?" "That you needed something for yourself." The question lingered. Margaret thought about it. Then she smiled gently. "Because I didn't know it either." Silence. "I spent a very long time being your mother." She looked at her hands. "I loved it. I still do. But somewhere along the way." She looked around the kitchen. "I forgot there was also me." Ryan swallowed. "I think I helped with that." She shook her head. "No. But. No, sweetheart." Her voice was soft but firm. "You didn't take my life away from me. I gave it to you." Silence. "And I don't regret that." She smiled. Not for 1 second. He looked down. That somehow made him feel even worse. Margaret reached across the table. Touched his hand. "Look at me." He did. "You made mistakes." A pause. "So did I." He frowned. "You?" She smiled. "I made you my whole world." Silence. "And children aren't supposed to carry that." The words settled between them. "I should have built more of a life for myself sooner." He blinked. "I never thought about that." "I know." Neither had she. Not until retirement. Not until the quiet. Not until she found herself standing in an empty house wondering who Margaret Ellis was. Ryan looked at the blue velvet box. Then at his mother. "What did Grandpa do?" She smiled. "My father?" He nodded. "He repaired clocks." "Really?" "Little shop in Columbus." A smile touched her face. He could fix almost anything. What was he like? Margaret looked toward the window. For a moment, she was somewhere else. He laughed a lot. Another smile. He never rushed. He smelled like sawdust. Ryan smiled. And every Sunday. She laughed softly. He'd let me wind his watches. Silence. I loved that. He listened carefully. These were stories he'd never heard. Entire pieces of his mother's life. Gone unnoticed for 38 years. Did he know about me? The question surprised her. She smiled. Oh yes. He did. She nodded. I was pregnant when he died. Silence. He never got to meet you. Her fingers rested on the velvet box. But he talked about you all the time. Ryan's throat tightened. What did he say? She smiled through tears. He hoped you'd be kind. The room became very still. A clock ticked somewhere in the house. He hoped you'd laugh easily. Another pause. And he hoped you'd always remember the people who love you. Ryan looked down. Because at this moment, he wasn't sure he had. A car pulled into the driveway. Then another. Margaret frowned. Who could that be? A knock sounded at the door. She opened it. Claire stood there. Behind her, the grandchildren. And behind them, Claire's parents. Everyone carried something. Flowers. Bags. Pie. Margaret blinked. What is all this? Claire smiled nervously. We came for dinner. Dinner? We canceled the anniversary trip. Silence. The grandchildren rushed inside. Grandma. Margaret laughed as they hugged her. Then she looked back at the adults. You didn't have to do this. Claire's eyes filled. I think we did. Another silence. Then Claire's mother stepped forward. She looked embarrassed. We didn't know. Margaret frowned. Know what? The older woman glanced at Ryan. Then back at Margaret. How much you've done for everyone. The kitchen grew quiet. Margaret looked at her son. He looked away. She almost smiled. Oh. He'd been talking. The little house slowly filled with people. Voices. Laughter. The smell of food. For the first time in a very long while. Every chair at the table would be used. Margaret stood in the doorway of the kitchen. Watching everyone. And suddenly, she understood something. Being left out had hurt. Deeply. But this was healing. Not because people felt guilty. Not because they owed her something. But because they had remembered. Remembered to make room. Remembered to ask. Remembered to see her. Ryan walked up beside her. He looked at the crowded kitchen. Then at his mother. And quietly said. Maybe we should have done this a long time ago. Margaret smiled. Maybe. Then she squeezed his hand. But we have tonight. And sometimes. Tonight is enough. The kitchen hadn't been this full in years. The grandchildren were arguing over who got the last dinner roll. Claire was setting plates on the table. Her father was opening a bottle of sparkling cider. Someone was laughing. Someone else was looking for napkins. The little house felt alive again. Margaret stood in the doorway, watching it all. For a moment, she didn't move. Because this was the sound she had missed. Not the trip. Not Napa Valley. Just this. A full house. Voices overlapping. People reaching across the table. Family. Ryan walked beside her. You okay? She smiled. Yes. He followed her gaze. I don't think I've seen this many people here since Christmas. Probably not. A small silence. Then he said quietly. I forgot how much you love having everyone together. Margaret looked at him. No. She smiled softly. You forgot because I stopped asking. That made him frown. She touched his arm. People can't give you something they don't know you need. He looked around the room. At the crowded kitchen. At his children laughing. At his wife helping his mother set the table. Then he looked back at her. I want to do better. She smiled. I know. Dinner was simple. Pot roast. Mashed potatoes. Green beans. The kind of meal Margaret had made 100 times before. But somehow, it tasted different. Halfway through dinner, her grandson looked up. Grandma? Yes, sweetheart. Can we come to your lake apartment? Everyone laughed. I haven't even finished unpacking. Please. She smiled. I think that can be arranged. I want to see the lake. I want to feed ducks. I want Grandma to make pancakes there. More laughter. Margaret looked at Ryan. His eyes were shining again. He wasn't crying. Not this time. He was simply watching. Watching his children love his mother. Watching his mother smile. Watching something precious that he had almost taken for granted. After dinner, Claire began helping clear the table. Then she stopped. Margaret? Yes? She looked nervous. I owe you an apology. The room became quieter. Claire took a breath. I thought I was protecting you. Margaret frowned. What do you mean? The trip. A pause. I thought you wouldn't enjoy it. She laughed softly. How silly that sounds now. Nobody spoke. Claire's eyes filled. I made a decision for you without asking you. She swallowed. And I made you feel unwanted. Margaret immediately reached for her hand. Oh, sweetheart. No, let me say it. A tear slipped down Claire's cheek. I am so sorry. Silence. I love you. Another breath. And I never want you to feel like an outsider in our family again. The room was completely still. Margaret smiled. Then she squeezed Claire's hand. I know. You know? I know you love me. Claire blinked. Even when people make mistakes. Margaret smiled gently. You can still feel their love. Claire began crying. The kind of crying that comes from relief. Margaret stood and hugged her. For a long moment, neither moved. Then she whispered. We're all right. Claire nodded against her shoulder. Okay. Later that evening, the grandchildren fell asleep on the couch. Claire's parents had gone home. The dishes were done. The house was quiet again. But this time, it was the comfortable kind of quiet. Ryan and Margaret sat on the back porch. The old porch swing creaked softly. Crickets chirped in the yard. Ryan looked at the stars. I don't want you to move. Margaret laughed. There it is. He smiled. I knew I'd say it eventually. She leaned back in the swing. I'll only be 20 minutes away. I know. A pause. I just don't like change. She looked at him. When did you become an old man? He laughed. Apparently this week. She smiled. Then her expression softened. Ryan? Yeah. One day, your children will grow up. He nodded. And one day, they'll build lives that don't revolve around you. Silence. It will hurt a little. Another silence. But if you've done your job well. She smiled. It will also make you proud. He looked at her. I never thought about that. I know. She had spent most of motherhood understanding things before he did. This was simply another one. After a while, he looked at the blue velvet box sitting on the little table beside them. The watch was inside. Safe. Home. Mom? Yes? Why did you keep the empty box all these years? She smiled. She had wondered if he'd ask. Then she looked out into the darkness. When your father died. Ryan looked at her. I was afraid I would forget things. The sound of my father's voice. The way he laughed. The way he wound his watch every night. She touched the velvet box. So I kept it. Silence. Even when it was empty? Especially when it was empty. He frowned. She smiled. Because empty things can still hold love. The porch grew quiet. Ryan looked at the box. Then at his mother. And suddenly. He understood. The box had never been empty. It had been filled with memory. With sacrifice. With a father's love. With a mother's love. With 31 years of silence. And now. With forgiveness. He looked at her and quietly said. I think I'm finally beginning to know you. Margaret smiled. A warm, peaceful smile. Then she reached over and took his hand. That's good. A small pause. Because I'm just beginning to know myself again too. The porch grew quiet. Crickets filled the spaces between their words. Inside, one of the grandchildren laughed in their sleep. Margaret smiled. I used to sit out here after you went to bed. Ryan looked at her. Really? She nodded. You hated sleeping. He laughed. I still do. You'd ask for water. Then another story. Then another hug. He smiled. I was difficult. She looked at him. No. A soft smile. You were little. They sat for a while. Then Ryan asked. Were you scared? About what? When Dad died. The question hung in the night air. Margaret looked toward the old maple tree in the yard. The same tree Ryan had climbed when he was 10. The same tree where she had once hung a tire swing. Yes, she said quietly. I was terrified. He had never heard her admit that. Not once. I didn't know. I know. A breeze moved through the leaves. I was 29. She smiled faintly. You were 3. I had $42 in my checking account. Ryan looked at her. I didn't know that either. She laughed softly. There are many things you didn't know. No blame. Just truth. I remember putting you to bed one night. She looked out into the darkness. And I sat in the kitchen and cried because the refrigerator was almost empty. Silence. I didn't know how I was going to do it. She smiled. But then morning came. And I made pancakes. Ryan's throat tightened. You always made pancakes. I know. Because children shouldn't carry adult worries. The old porch swing creaked gently. He looked at her. At the woman who had somehow made every hard season feel normal. Every sacrifice feel invisible. Every struggle look easy. Mom? Yes? You must have been so lonely. She thought about it. Then nodded. Sometimes. That word hurt more than if she had said yes. Because sometimes meant more than once. More than she deserved. I wish I'd known. She looked at him. No, you don't. He frowned. Why? Because then you would have worried. She smiled. And I worked very hard to make sure you didn't. He lowered his eyes. There it was again. A mother's quiet work. The things children never see. A screen door slid open. Claire stepped onto the porch. She carried 3 mugs of tea. I thought you two might be cold. Margaret smiled. You're a good daughter-in-law. Claire laughed. I owe you at least a cup of tea. She sat beside them. For a while, the 3 of them simply listened to the night. Then Claire spoke. I've been thinking about something. That's dangerous, Margaret said. They all laughed. Claire looked toward the yard. I think I spent so much time trying to create perfect moments. She smiled sadly. That I forgot ordinary moments matter too. Silence. The big trip. The nice hotel. The fancy dinner. She looked at Margaret. And meanwhile, the person who taught our children how to bake cookies was sitting at home. No one spoke. Claire wiped at her eyes. I don't like the person I was that week. Margaret reached over and squeezed her hand. You are not the worst thing you've ever done. Claire looked at her. And neither is Ryan. A small silence. We all forget things. She smiled gently. The important part is remembering again. Claire nodded. Then she laughed softly. You really should write greeting cards. That made Margaret laugh. The front door opened again. This time it was Emily, their 10-year-old daughter. She stood on the porch in pajamas, rubbing her eyes. Grandma? Yes, sweetheart. Are you really moving? Margaret smiled. I am. Emily looked worried. Why? Margaret thought for a moment. Then she patted the empty space beside her. Emily climbed onto the porch swing. Because sometimes people need a new adventure. The little girl frowned. Even grandmas? Especially grandmas. Emily considered this very seriously. Then she asked. Will you still make pancakes? Everyone laughed. Of course. Will you still come to my school play? Yes. And my birthday? Wouldn't miss it. Emily relaxed. Then she asked the question that made all 3 adults smile. Then why is everybody acting like you're moving to the moon? Silence. Then Ryan laughed. A real laugh. The first one in days. Even Margaret laughed. Because children have a way of finding the truth. Later, after everyone had gone to bed, Ryan remained on the porch alone. The house was dark. Only the kitchen light remained on. Through the window, he could see his mother. She was standing at the table. The blue velvet box open in front of her. The watch in her hands. She wasn't crying. She was smiling. As though she were having a quiet conversation with someone only she could see. Then she gently wound the watch. Held it to her ear. And closed her eyes. Tick. 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 Ryan suddenly realized something. He had spent the last few days trying to return something his mother had lost. But maybe she hadn't lost it at all. Not really. Because the watch had never simply been silver and gears and a chain. It had been love. And love had never left this house. It had been here all along. In pancakes. In birthday cakes. In school lunches. In hospital rooms. In every ordinary day. He stood there for a long time. Then quietly whispered into the night. Thank you, Grandpa. The old maple tree moved gently in the wind. And somewhere inside the house, a silver watch kept ticking toward tomorrow. The next morning, the old house was full of cardboard boxes. The moving truck would arrive in an hour. Margaret stood in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, looking around one last time. The refrigerator was empty. The walls were bare. Even the calendar by the phone had been taken down. 35 years in one house. Reduced to boxes. She smiled. Strange, how life works. The years feel endless while you're living them. Then one day, they fit into a moving truck. Footsteps came from the hallway. Ryan. He looked like he hadn't slept. Neither had she. "Morning," he said. "Morning." He poured himself coffee. Then stood beside her in silence. The kitchen window overlooked the backyard. The old maple tree. The tire swing. The place where he had once buried a hamster. A lot of life had happened out there. Finally, he spoke. "I don't think I'm ready." Margaret smiled. "For what?" He looked around. "For this house not being yours anymore." She looked at him. Then out the window again. "I wasn't ready either." A small silence. But life moves anyway. The movers arrived just after 9. Boxes disappeared one by one. The bookshelf. The rocking chair. The lamp by the window. The little house slowly became empty. Emily walked from room to room, looking heartbroken. "Grandma, it looks weird." "It does. It doesn't even smell the same." Margaret laughed softly. "No, I suppose it doesn't." The little girl looked up. "Are you sad?" Margaret thought about it. Then nodded. "A little." Emily slipped her hand into hers. "I'm sad too." Margaret squeezed it. "That's okay." The little girl frowned. "It is?" "Of course." A smile. When something matters to us, saying goodbye is supposed to feel a little sad. Emily considered that. Then nodded. Children understand more than we think. By noon, the house was almost empty. Only the kitchen table remained. The same table where Ryan had done homework. The same table where bills had been paid. The same table where she had sat alone with an empty blue velvet box. Margaret ran her hand across it. Ryan watched her. "Want me to load it?" She shook her head. "1 minute." He waited. After a while, she smiled. "Okay." Together, they carried it to the truck. When everything was finished, they stood in the living room. Empty. Echoing. Sunlight spilled across the floor. Margaret looked around one last time. "I thought I'd cry more." Ryan smiled sadly. "You still can." She laughed. "No, I think I'm all right." She looked at him. "Because this house did its job." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "It kept us safe." A pause. "It held birthdays. Christmases. Bad report cards. Broken hearts." She smiled. "It gave us a place to become a family." Silence. "And now?" She took a deep breath. "It's someone else's turn." Tears filled his eyes. Again. She laughed softly. "You really do cry a lot." "I know." He wiped his face. "I get it from you." Then he reached into his pocket. "I have something." She looked surprised. "What now?" He handed her a small envelope. She opened it. Inside was a photograph. The picture from the hospital. The one he had found in the garage. On the back, in her own handwriting. "The day we came home." She smiled. "I forgot about this." "I almost did too." Silence. Then he spoke. "Mom." She looked up. "I think this picture says everything." She frowned. "What do you mean?" He swallowed. "You never wrote about the bill. Or the watch. Or how scared you were." He looked at the photograph. "You wrote about coming home." Tears filled her eyes. Because he understood. Finally. "You only cared that I made it home." She nodded once. That was all that had ever mattered. He smiled through his tears. "I spent so much of my life thinking you were strong because you never needed anything." A pause. "But I think I was wrong." She looked at him. I think you're strong because you kept loving people, even when it cost you something. The room became very quiet. Then Margaret did something she rarely did. She cried first. Not because she was sad, but because being understood after so many years can break your heart a little. In the best possible way. She stepped forward and held her son. And this time, he held her just as tightly. The movers closed the truck. The front door was locked for the last time. Margaret slipped the key into the mailbox. Then she turned around. Ryan was standing there. Hands in his pockets. Looking suddenly like the little boy who hated goodbyes. She smiled. I'm only 20 minutes away. I know. You can visit. I know. I'll still make pancakes. He laughed. I know. She touched his cheek. Then what is it? He looked at her for a long moment. Then said quietly. I think I spent a lot of years being loved by you. A pause. And not enough years knowing you. The words settled softly between them. She smiled. Then we'll fix that. He nodded. A tear slipped down his face. She wiped it away. Just as she had when he was 7. Just as she had when he was 17. Some things never change. The car pulled away. The old house grew smaller in the rearview mirror. Then disappeared. Margaret looked at the blue velvet box resting in her lap. She opened it. The silver watch lay inside. Safe. Home. She wound it once. Held it to her ear. Tick. 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 Then she smiled. Because time had taken many things. Her parents. Her youth. 31 years with this watch. Even the little house where she raised her son. But time had given something back too. A new beginning. A son who finally saw her. And a quiet little apartment by the lake. At 63. That felt like more than enough. The first thing Margaret noticed about the apartment was the quiet. Not the lonely kind. A gentle kind. The kind that comes from water nearby. The kind that invites you to slow down. The movers left just before sunset. Boxes filled the living room. The kitchen was still half-packed. One lamp stood in the corner. The curtains hadn't even been hung. And for the first time in 35 years. Every decision belonged only to her. She smiled. Then laughed softly. It felt strange. And wonderful. Ryan carried in the last box. Where does this one go? Margaret looked at the label. Books. Anywhere for now. He set it down. Then looked around. The apartment was small. 1 bedroom. A little balcony. A view of the lake. Simple. Peaceful. Very much his mother. I like it, he said. I do too. She walked to the balcony doors and opened them. A cool breeze drifted inside. The lake glimmered under the evening sun. A boat moved slowly in the distance. She stood there for a long moment. Then whispered. Hello. Ryan smiled. What are you doing? Saying hello. To who? She looked at the water. My new life. That made him laugh. Then, unexpectedly, his eyes filled again. She looked at him. Oh no. What? No crying. He laughed. I can't help it. You absolutely can. I really can't. She smiled and hugged his arm. You're going to make me start. A little while later, there was another knock at the door. Then another. Then another. Margaret frowned. When she opened the door, she laughed. Claire. The children. Ruth. Claire's parents. And enough food to feed an army. Emily held up a pie. We brought dinner. Ruth lifted 2 grocery bags. And paper plates. Claire smiled. We thought your first night here shouldn't be quiet. Margaret looked at all of them. Then at the tiny apartment. Then back at them. Her eyes filled. She quickly blinked. Too late. Ruth saw. You cry and I leave. Margaret laughed. Come in. The apartment was suddenly full. Voices. Laughter. People bumping into boxes. The children argued about who got the sofa. Someone couldn't find forks. Someone dropped a napkin. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. At one point, Margaret stepped onto the balcony for a little air. A moment later, Ryan joined her. Neither said anything. The lake shimmered under the last light of day. Then he spoke. You know. I think I finally understand something. She looked at him. What's that? He smiled. I thought this move meant I was losing you. She waited. But that's not what this is. A small silence. You finally get to belong to yourself too. The words settled gently between them. She looked at her son. Then at the lake. Then back at him. And smiled. I think that's exactly what this is. Inside, Emily appeared at the balcony door. Grandma? Yes? Can I sleep here sometime? Margaret laughed. Of course. And can we feed ducks? Yes. And make pancakes? Absolutely. The little girl grinned. Then I like your new house. She ran back inside. Ryan laughed. Children make everything simple. The sun finally disappeared. Lights appeared across the lake. The apartment glowed warmly behind them. Margaret slipped her hand into her pocket. Pulled out the blue velvet box. Ryan looked at it. She opened it. The silver watch rested inside. She wound it once. Then held it to her ear. Tick. 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 The same sound. After all these years. She looked at the engraving one more time. To my Margaret. Time may take many things. But never forget your worth. Love, Dad. A tear slipped down her cheek. This time, she didn't wipe it away. She smiled instead. Because for years, she thought those words were about surviving loss. Now she understood. They were about remembering yourself. Even after years of being needed. Even after sacrifice. Even after heartbreak. She was still here. Still Margaret. Still worthy. She closed the watch. Then looked at her son. He smiled back. Not with guilt. Not with regret. With understanding. A new kind of understanding. The kind that changes families. Inside, someone called her name. Dinner was ready. The grandchildren were waiting. Life was waiting. She slipped the watch back into its box. Then took Ryan's hand. Come on. He smiled. After you. They walked inside together. And for the first time in a very long while, Margaret felt something she hadn't expected to find at 63. Not youth. Not excitement. Not even happiness. Peace. The deep, steady kind. The kind that comes when love remains. But the hurt is finally gone. My dear friends, sometimes the people who love us the most give up pieces of themselves so quietly that we never notice. And sometimes, if we're lucky, life gives us another chance to truly see them. If Margaret's story touched your heart today, leave a comment and let me know you're here. Have you ever realized a parent's sacrifice only years later? I'd love to hear your story. And if you enjoy heartfelt family stories like this one, please subscribe to our little family story corner. Until next time, take care of the people who love you, And don't forget to take care of yourself too. Sweet dreams, ***.